So we're going to get started. My name's Claire Balsley. I am SBP's Director of Disaster Assistance Programs. We started our disaster assistance program as a pilot program towards the end of 2020. This was after Hurricanes Laura and Delta. SBP, one of our big programs is rebuild, right? And so we have funds to help in the rebuild. However, we wanted to help survivors even more by maximizing the amount of funding that we could put into the home. So we started helping them with their FEMA appeals so that we could apply some of the funds they received from FEMA towards the home as well. Then we read a Washington Post article in May of 2021 that highlighted the percentage of survivors who apply for FEMA assistance and are denied, and the subsequent percentage of survivors who appeal. So according to that Washington Post article, anywhere between 66 to 87% of survivors are denied assistance. Now, this isn't because they're just blanket denied, it's because of a slew of reasons, right? They might not have supplied proper documentation. They might have missed things in the application process. They might have insurance and didn't supply additional documentation there. But the fact that only 4% of survivors appeal FEMA denial letters is what really struck us. And we thought we need to start this program to ensure survivors understand that they can and should appeal any FEMA determination that they do not understand or they do not agree with, right? Since that time, we have filed appeals on behalf of over 600 survivors, and we have helped them access more than $2.5 million in additional FEMA funds for their recovery. So that's the about me, and now let's talk about FEMA assistance. So, as you guys are well aware, after a disaster occurs, there is a sequence of when people come in and how long they stay, right? So, the very first people who are on the ground are your neighbors and your community. And the people who stay the longest are your neighbors and your community, these nonprofit organizations like you who are there for this long-term recovery, which Joe's going to explain more about the whole long-term recovery side of things. So that is where we want to rely a lot of our assistance on, is our neighbors, our community, these nonprofit organizations. Then, and I'm gonna say you as if you are the survivor. That's how I'm gonna speak, okay? So if you have the financial capacity to have insurance, which is what we plug, if at all possible to have insurance. If you have insurance, that's where you want to rely next, right? Immediately apply for, file a claim with your insurance company, whether or not you have insurance that you know will cover the damages. I'm going to explain in a different way. So with the winter storms that had occurred, it's a lot of flood damage, right? Now, I'm a Californian myself, and we face wildfires more recently quite a bit, but there's the thought of having flood damage is less likely. So it's more probable that you do not have flood insurance. You might have coverage for earthquakes, you might have coverage for wildfires, but you might not have thought about flood insurance. Knowing that your homeowner's insurance does not cover floods, you might think, I'm not going to file a claim because I know I'm going to be denied. Do not do that. Make sure you file a claim with all your insurance companies. Because when you file a FEMA application and you note that you have insurance, FEMA is going to want to understand, were you covered? What were you covered for? Were you denied? Did you receive a settlement? Before they go ahead and make a determination on their end, right? So you want to make sure you apply for your insurance settlement. You file a claim with your insurance as quickly as possible. Congruently, you want to apply for FEMA assistance because, again, you don't know if your insurance is going to cover you completely, right? Your insurance may deny you. And FEMA may be able to cover you in places that your insurance coverage does not cover, right? So always apply congruently. Additionally, this is also very important. The FEMA application and appeals process is not only important to you for your individual recovery, but it is important for your community's recovery. HUD has the possibility of providing community development block grant disaster recovery funds. Now, it's a possibility, it's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility. And they base those funds off of what FEMA has provided in a community. So if there are fewer people appealing and fewer people applying for FEMA assistance and fewer FEMA dollars coming to a community for individuals, there's a greater likelihood that there's going to be fewer FEMA or HUD monies that come in to help in that long-term recovery, right? So this is all very important to understand. Now, another thing I want to make abundantly clear is that FEMA, insurance, and the Small Business Administration, which we're going to talk about here in the next slide, all work together, but they want to make sure they avoid duplication of benefits, right? FEMA is grant funding, and these grant funds are intended for survivors who truly need it, right? That's another reason why there's high initial denial rates, because FEMA wants to ensure that only those survivors who really need the assistance receive it, right? Because you could have people who don't actually need it, or people who are gaming the system trying to get there. They want to make sure that the funds go to those who need it. So, duplication of benefits is a word you're going to hear a lot in the disaster recovery world, right? With FEMA and insurance, like I had stated, you're going to want to make sure that you supply FEMA with all your insurance information. We're going to go into this in more detail as well. That way they can understand what has been covered and what absolutely will not be covered to see if there's any way that FEMA can provide some grant funding, right? For the Small Business Administration, let's move to the next slide and let's talk about the SBA. So, again, FEMA's grant funds. But FEMA is very clear that they are here to help provide safe, sanitary, and functional living. They're not giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to have that pre-disaster rebuild, right? So, FEMA and the Small Business Administration has partnered together in a way to say, hey, look, we might not be able to get you back to that pre-disaster condition, but you might be qualified for a loan that is low interest, long-term, that can bring your home back to that pre-disaster condition or your belongings, right? So you think Small Business Administration, you think small business loans. In federally declared disasters, the Small Business Administration comes in to help homeowners and renters in offering, if qualified, these loans. Now, FEMA is a needs-based grant, and the maximum award is based off of the Consumer Price Index. Every October 1st, it's reevaluated, and a new maximum award amount is presented for that following fiscal year. So it's every October 1st. So with the winter storms and anything leading up to September 30th of this year, the maximum award that homeowners can receive for home repair appeals or home repair is $41,000. The maximum award that survivors can receive for other needs assistance, if they are a homeowner or a renter, is up to $41,000. Okay? That is for this year, fiscal year, right? On October 1st, that might change, right? So disasters that occurred prior to October 1st, which was Hurricanes Ian and Hurricanes Fiona, their maximum award is $37,900, right? So you can see how there's changed according to the Consumer Price Index. FEMA also does not have a system for a credit check to understand who really qualifies for a grant, right? That's another reason that they've partnered with the Small Business Administration, who has that ability to do that background credit check. So SBA loans are income-based, and they check your credit to see if you actually qualify for a loan. If you are a homeowner, you could qualify for up to $200,000 loan. The interest is very low. The term length is anywhere between 15 to 30 years generally. I can't exactly quote what current interest rates are. I'm not sure. I do know last year was anywhere between 2.18 to 4%. I'm not sure of this year. Last year, the SBA also stated they were going to have first year of loan as 0% interest. Again, I cannot guarantee that that is what it is this year, but that was last year. For renters, they could qualify for a loan of up to $40,000 to help bring all their personal belongings that were damaged in the disaster back to that pre-disaster condition, or buy new personal belongings. Now, there is a possibility for you as a homeowner to receive FEMA assistance plus SBA assistance, but the SBA would deduct the entire amount of assistance FEMA provided you and then say this is what the loan is that you could qualify for. So they'll tell you what you can qualify for, they'll tell you what you can qualify for, then they'll deduct exactly what FEMA's provided you, everything for every category, and then the remaining is what you could get a loan for. You have a question over here.
Yeah, why would other needs be calculated at that amount, or is it?
So FEMA. So the question was, why would other needs be calculated in that amount? It's duplication of benefits. So FEMA and the SBA. I don't have the answer to that. I don't know, Robin, if you might have the answer to that.
It's going to go back to the duplication of benefits, and the $41,000 for ONA for this year, for this
fiscal year.
Because of the new FEMA program called DARA, we're able to provide the same amount for ONA and the same amount for the physical structure of your home. It covers two different categories. Same thing with SBA. SBA does the maximum loan for up to $200,000 and up to $40,000 for both owners and renters.
Yeah, but I guess my question is if
why would
$41,000 is for the home, why would SBA potentially take away $82,000 off of that?
Because it's a duplication of benefits.
But one is for the structure and the other one is
But if they got the loan for both from SBA, so you might not qualify for a loan from SBA. You might not qualify for a loan from SBA for both personal property and the physical structure. So if you do, and FEMA also gave you ONA, Other Needs Assistance grant money, as well as the $41,000 for your structure, that's the duplication. So if FEMA only gave you one and you got no ONA,
right,
you could potentially receive that from SBA. And they're not gonna take that, I don't believe SBA takes that 41,000 off because it's two different categories.
Okay.
It's two different categories.
So
Yeah.
it's not 81,000 out of the maximum loan amount of 200 for your structure. It would only be 41.
Only what you received from FEMA.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robin. All right, so these are things to keep in mind. Duplication of benefits is a very important thing to keep in mind. Additionally, oh, yes, you have a question over here.
You talk about SBA is income-based. The most serious problem with the survivors after the disasters is they lost jobs. So what about that?
It's a great question. So the SBA uses IRS tax information, right? So unfortunately, even if a survivor loses their job, what the SBA does is they look back on historic IRS tax information to make those determinations. My knowledge base, I'm gonna be completely honest, is not as extensive with all things SBA as it is with FEMA. So that would have to be a question that I'd have to find out and get back to you on. Yeah. Regarding insurance, one more thing, and duplication of benefits. Now, FEMA's maximum award, like I said, is $41,000 for home repair, $41,000 for other needs. Let's say you have insurance that's $100,000 of settlement, right? It's very unlikely, very, very, very unlikely that FEMA would provide anything in addition to that because it supersedes what FEMA's maximum grant is. Now it could be, sorry, I'll get right to you. It could be that there is coverage or there's an item in your insurance that is not covered, right? Let's say you don't have rental assistance. ALE is what it's called in your insurance. Let's say there's certain items that are not covered. FEMA may be able to provide that coverage. So just because you received $100,000 from your insurance doesn't mean that FEMA's not going to provide you anything. It just means that you need to provide that declaration page to FEMA so they can understand if there's anything they can provide assistance with. Valerie.
And to follow up on that, that's exactly right. But there are also things that your insurance company might send you a denial of. So think, sorry about this. So there are things that they might not cover, like if the property had a private bridge, they might not cover a retaining wall, the septic system might be excluded, so it's not just that deck page. If you've got a denial for something you submitted, with the wildfires, we had a lot of denials for things that were required for pre-clearances, like soils testing and seismic and things that the insurance said, we're not going to cover because that's not part of you rebuilding a house, even though it is. And if we can get the message to people early enough that these things that are not covered, let's get your appeals going.
Thank you. Okay. So let's talk about the types of assistance FEMA can provide. But I want you to notice the items circled in yellow, right? These items circled in yellow have a contingency. And that contingency is the SBA. So we're going to explain this, but just keep note of that, right? So HA, and apologies for these little acronyms, HA stands for Housing Assistance, which includes home repair or home replacement, right? Again, if you are a homeowner, and this part's important, a homeowner who is the primary residence where you are living, right? Has to be those two qualifications. You have to be the homeowner and be living at the home at the time of the disaster, you may qualify for up to $41,000. If you are not the homeowner, if you're the renter or if it's your family's house that you're living in, unfortunately, FEMA will not be able to provide any home repair assistance. You have to be the homeowner. And I think inside your packet, I'm hoping I added that. I did. We have ways in which you can prove ownership, right? That can be something like the deed to the home, your title. There's a list, and you don't have to compile everything, right? It's just one of those items, right? Due to heirs property, this grandfathered in property, due to heirs property, which the house has been passed down from generation to generation to generation, FEMA has allowed for something outside of the deed and the title, and that is a major repair receipt that had been performed on the home, a major repair that's been performed on the home within 5 years prior to the date of the disaster. So let's say you replaced your HVAC system and you have the receipt for that. That is sufficient to prove to FEMA that you own your home. You have a lot of people in Louisiana, a lot of people in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria who had this issue of proving ownership. And so this was recently codified in Congress on the Hill, that this is an accurate way to prove ownership for FEMA. So you'll see a number of things. You're also going to see a self-certified letter. That is a last resort. It's less probable to receive an approved appeal with a self-certified letter than if you use any of those other types of documents. So you really want to try to find some type of legalized document or a major repair receipt. The self-certified letter stating, I'm the owner of this home, is the very, very last resort. Okay? So that's home repair assistance. ONA stands for Other Needs Assistance. So if you are a homeowner or if you are a renter, you may qualify for the items listed in this Other Needs Assistance. So, personal property, transportation, moving and storage, medical, dental, funeral, childcare, miscellaneous, critical needs, cleanup and removal, and group flood insurance. Again, those items circled in yellow are contingent upon the SBA. Now, when you apply for FEMA assistance, FEMA is going to ask you what your household income is. If you put 0 down as your household income, you are automatically going to be referred over to the SBA. Automatically. Okay? So that's but you might be thinking, but I'm on Social Security. I'm actually on unemployment right now. I'm on, I have my alimony or, whatever it is. You want to calculate what that is and place it inside your household income. FEMA's thought is no one survives off of nothing. So you want to accurately identify what your household income is. Yes?
I know that it was kind of suggested already if a person had a job prior to a disaster and then now post-disaster didn't. If a person had a job prior to a disaster and then afterwards no longer is employed and didn't go through the process of applying for assistance, how would you document that? Or
Yeah, that's harder to document, and oftentimes people who are contract workers and they don't have a continual income, that's also hard to document. So as many times, FEMA will refer that survivor over to the SBA. right? So yeah, that's hard to gauge. But what I will say is if you are referred over to the SBA, one, apply immediately. Because again, lost that thing. Those items circled in yellow are contingent upon a SBA determination, right? So first thing, make sure you apply right away. But secondly, if you have made under the threshold of what the IRS requires to file taxes, right, which I think is $25,000 a year, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you make under that and you have not filed taxes over the past few years, you really want to make sure when you are applying for an SBA loan, you identify that with pay stubs, with other items. Kind of crinkling over here. The reason being, FEMA, or not, excuse me, not FEMA, the SBA, if they are unable to find out what your IRS tax information is over the last few years, they will not move forward with that determination for the loan, right? They will withdraw your application. They will withdraw your application. Then they're going to send a note to FEMA saying the survivor withdrew their application, which is not correct, right? And then FEMA's hands are tied. FEMA can't do anything at that point until FEMA knows that the SBA has denied the survivor a loan. So at that point, it is going back to the SBA and advocating for the SBA to reconsider their loan, right? And that might be numerous phone calls, numerous letters, all types of documentation that you can provide indicating that your income is insufficient for a loan. So what you want to do when you apply for an SBA loan, if you have not filed taxes in the last few years because you have not been required to because your income is much lower than what that need is, be sure to supply the SBA with whatever income documents that you do have that may be able to help them. Yes, sir.
From your experience, what have you found as far as a time frame? You don't apply for FEMA, so you go SBA, then you're saying all these letters and everything's contingent on that. It doesn't work, it goes back to FEMA. What's your time frame have you found?
Ooh, so he asked, what's the time frame that he's found going back and forth with FEMA, SBA? I'll just even throw in insurance. It can be a while. Recovery is not quick, right? Thankfully, the FEMA assistance window is 18 months from the date of the disaster, the date of the declaration of the disaster. 18 months, which means generally, the first 60 days after a disaster is the application window. It could be extended depending upon the severity of the disaster and other qualifications. Could be extended, but it's best to try to get that application in within the first 60 days just in case, right? Then FEMA says they will respond within up to 90 days, right? Sometimes can be longer. So they'll make a determination within 90 days. Respond to you with a determination letter. Then you have 60 days. FEMA writes in their determination letter. You have 60 days to appeal this decision. Now, but then you're thinking, well, I'm waiting on my insurance. My insurance hasn't gotten back to me. I'm fighting with the SBA. The SBA is not getting back to me. What am I going to do? I'm after that 60-day deadline. Is all lost for me? No, all is not lost. What you need to do in that appeal letter is identify why there was a delay in writing that appeal. So state, I am writing this appeal after my 60-day deadline because the SBA had withdrawn my loan application, and I've been working with them to make a determination. I've finally received a determination. I've confirmed with FEMA on their helpline that it shows that I was denied, so I would like to appeal for additional assistance. Or I've been working with my insurance company, they've finally come up with a settlement, or they've finally sent me a denial letter. Or, and this is another thing, with appeals for home repair, it's very important to include contractor estimates to really help substantiate the claims in those appeals, right? So it might take you a while to find a contractor who is available to provide those estimates. Or if you are, low income, it might take you a while to get enough funds to pay for estimates, right? So explaining that in the appeal letter should be sufficient for FEMA to overlook that 60-day requirement, right? And so essentially, if it took 3, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months for you to be able to work out whatever insurance, SBA, contractor issue, or anything else, or you as a survivor advocate, the survivor says, hey, I didn't even know I could appeal. I didn't read to page 3 of the determination letter to know I could appeal. Or I didn't know how to appeal. And now I met, what's your name?
James.
I met James, who is helping me in my appeal, right? These things are so important for survivors to understand. Then you have up until that 18-month mark of the FEMA assistance.
Well, you already pushed 12 months. From what you just said, you've already pushed a year. So you've got 6 months. Hopefully they'll respond.
So, yeah, so you can, it's 90-day response time generally, unless there's some super tricky situation that FEMA's trying to work out, right? You can appeal all the way up to the midnight deadline, right? And then it'll, at that point, at that midnight deadline of that 18 months, you cannot appeal, but FEMA still has up to 90 days to make that determination, maybe longer if, it's a tricky situation. Did that answer your question? Yeah?
Yeah, thank you.
Robin?
Can I just add to that, as a survivor, if you call the 800 number
It's okay, I got it.
and let them know you'd like an update, if you call the 800 number and ask FEMA, the help desk, for an update on your appeal status, knowing that they have 90 days, we have 90 days to respond, that pushes your information back down to somebody else's supervisory level to say, we need to start working on this case.
So it extends your time.
So, no, it doesn't extend, but it can get your application for your appeal process moved back up.
That's it.
Thank you. Okay, so personal property and transportation are some of the highest award amounts that could be received in other needs assistance. For this reason, those are the contingent items, right? Group flood insurance is also looped in there. Now, group flood insurance is part of the National Flood Insurance Policy, NFIP. And if qualified, survivors could receive up to 3 years of flood insurance that is covered by FEMA assistance, right? And we'll go into this in a little more detail a little bit later, but giving that heads up. Now, these 3 items right here, and especially if you're a renter, and you want access to the potentiality of those 3 items, and FEMA refers you over to the SBA, apply immediately. FEMA will not process anything until there's a denial. So let's say you apply to the SBA and you are approved a loan. You do not need to accept that loan. However, just understand that these 3 items circled in yellow will not be provided, you will not receive any assistance from FEMA for those items if you are approved a loan. Again, you do not need to accept the loan from the SBA. What FEMA just wants to know is whether or not you were denied. If you are denied a loan from the SBA, what will happen is FEMA and the SBA have some internal connectivity system, right? And FEMA has a program called NEMIS, and this NEMIS program has a banner bar. And at the top banner bar has a little bold SBA sign and then a code that goes after it. There is no FEMA agent that can change that code. That code can only be changed through the SBA. And once the SBA has done whatever magic they've done to update that code, then FEMA can begin processing the appeal or the application to see if the survivor qualifies for those 3 items. There have been times that survivors we've worked with have received denials from the SBA. However, FEMA's system did not reflect that. FEMA's system still showed processing, right? Or survivor still needs to apply to the SBA. There's nothing FEMA can do. FEMA's hands are tied. You can send that denial letter to FEMA, and FEMA can put it in your case. However, FEMA says, we don't know if it's fraud or not. It has to come from the SBA, right? So it's very important. If you receive a denial letter from the SBA, call FEMA's helpline. Make sure that it's reflected on FEMA's end. If it is not, you're going to have to circle back with the SBA and say, hey, I need you to refresh your computer system. Do whatever magic you need to do to get this updated on my end, right? And the SBA might push back and say, well, we haven't done anything. Keep pushing, because unless the SBA updates FEMA's system, those items are not going to be received. This is vitally important for renters, because if you're a renter, you're not going to receive home repair assistance, home replacement assistance. You're not going to receive that. And out of everything in other needs assistance, it's personal property that renters mostly need assistance with, right? So again, I can't state it enough. Apply to the SBA as soon as you're referred. You may not be referred if you fall within a certain threshold of income, right? Apply to SBA as soon as you're referred. If you are denied, call FEMA's helpline. Make sure it's reflected in their system. If it's not, call the SBA. If you are withdrawn from an SBA loan, call the SBA, get it reassessed. Yes?
Why would someone be denied?
Oh, why would someone be denied assistance? That's a great question. So denied because you are, your income is not sufficient. So it's a failed income test is what they call it, FIT in FEMA. Or you might have really poor credit. And in that case, you could, even if you have poor credit, you may qualify with the SBA, but you just have a higher interest rate, right? But those are really the 2 things. Again, FEMA's a needs-based grant. So they want to make sure that those who truly need that grant receive it. And if your income is really sufficient for you to be able to get a really nice low-interest long-term loan, then they'll want you to go that route.
So then it's really important that the renter understands that, oh, I'm sorry, thanks. So, surprised me. In the event, the renter really needs to understand that you're not a property owner, therefore your property provider will be the one who's going to have to apply for this. And that we can take care of you as far as personal, but we can't take care of you as from what you're talking about for the property.
Yeah, so the landlord, unfortunately, will not be able to receive any FEMA assistance because it is not their primary residence. Yeah. Even with the SBA, if you are a landlord with rental units, you may be able to qualify for an SBA loan, but that's a small business loan, right? So maybe you want to make sure that your landlord has property insurance before you move in, because that'll be more.
So if your property is completely damaged and you're a survivor and you've got a mortgage, you own the property, is your mortgage wiped out and then you get this SBA loan, or how does it work? Does it serve as a second mortgage?
Yeah, so for this one specifically, I just toured with Fannie Mae on the Marshall Fire, so SBA will be a second. That's not a position they like to be, but they do fall into a second if you do have a mortgage. Your mortgage is not wiped out unless you decide to take your insurance proceeds and pay off that loan. You never want people to do that, and we're talking total losses for that.
Yeah.
Partial losses, they're vested in you repairing the property, but for total losses, you shouldn't pay off your mortgage unless you have a plan for rebuilding, because for people now that the interest rates are nearly tripled, you won't get that, you won't see that number again that people have for current mortgages, so there's that consideration. But if they're retired and they're not going to qualify for that loan again. And so if an insurer, the checks are going to come, they'll issue the check, the insurance company will issue the check to both the consumer and the mortgage company. The mortgage company is going to hold the funds. They're only allowed to hold the funds related to the dwelling, and they can only hold up to the loan amount. A lot of insurance companies like to hold more than they're entitled to, and so there's some issues there in pushing back. Also, they're required to pay interest to you, and that doesn't necessarily happen because they're holding your funds, and that those funds are for you, not their benefit. But those two things are key to know. And I think I hit everything right.
Robin?
And I would also add that when you apply for the SBA and you know that you're eligible to receive an SBA loan as a homeowner, talk to the agent about rolling your mortgage into that lower interest loan. That's also helpful.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so if you are a homeowner, you could be eligible for up to $41,000 for home repair. If you are a homeowner or a renter, you could be eligible for up to $41,000 for other needs assistance, including personal property, transportation, and group flood insurance if you were referred over to the SBA and denied. Now, the final column, or row, is rental assistance and access and functional needs assistance. We're going to talk about these two types of assistance. Rental assistance is something that FEMA could provide if your home is not safe to occupy and you are willing to relocate. There are two questions FEMA is going to ask you, right? Now, there could be the time when FEMA asks, are you living in your home? And you say, yeah, but there's mold all over the place, up to here, your floors are soggy, and you say yes without saying, but it's not safe for me to be here. FEMA might automatically think, well, the home is safe to occupy, we don't need to provide any assistance. So you need to make sure that FEMA clearly understands if the home is not safe to occupy or if you are unsure if the home is safe to occupy. So either say, I don't know if it's safe to occupy, or it is not safe to occupy if you're not sure if it's safe to occupy. Then they're going to ask you, are you willing to relocate? And you might think, but this is my home, I don't want to leave forever, That's not what they mean. They mean, are you willing to temporarily step out of that unsafe environment and live somewhere else while you bring your home back to that safe, sanitary, and functional condition, right? With those two qualifications, FEMA may provide rental assistance. Now, rental assistance is 2 months worth of rent. that does not equal 2 months worth of rent. I know I just confused you right there, right? So they're going to provide you with 2 months worth of rent that is kind of like the Kmart variety of 2 months worth of rent, right? It's a lower amount of rent than what you'll actually be able to afford or find, right? But it's better than nothing, right? So they'll provide you with 2 months worth of rent. And after 1 month, FEMA is going to send something over called a continued temporary housing assistance form. As you can see right there, continued temporary housing assistance. And we'll go into this in more detail. You'll fill all that out, include all the needed documents, which we'll discuss, send it back to FEMA. They'll reevaluate whether or not you are eligible for an additional 2 months worth of rent. This will continue every 2 months until you are able to go back into your home or find permanent housing, or until FEMA no longer qualifies you for this assistance, or until the FEMA assistance window ends. Yes, ma'am.
Would this also include people who, would this also include people that might have relocated temporarily into like hotel housing? They're waiting to get back into their place, like the people in Pajaro that were affected with the flooding?
So you have something called lodging expense reimbursement right here for people who were temporarily displaced and went into hotels. FEMA may potentially reimburse you, but you have to really identify that the reason you went to that hotel was because of the disaster. And generally FEMA will not provide assistance, days before the disaster, right? It has to be because of the disaster, you were in that temporary hotel, right? You need to include receipts. Definitely need to include receipts, include contact information of the lodging where you were, because FEMA calls to verify. And you may be eligible for that.
So just a question about what if, like if they had insurance or the landlord had insurance, take the renter's case, and they're saying the house is safe to go back to, but your independent experts are saying it's not, because there's always a lot of dispute with those with mold issues and partial losses with smoke, wildfires. So would FEMA still pay as long as you've got documentation to support that?
My expertise isn't so much in wildfires, and so I haven't come across something where if you have this conflicting information.
Well, I'm thinking the mold too, because
Yeah,
I'm seeing that
okay.
in Florida
Okay,
too.
yeah. So the start of the question was, if you have insurance or some person saying, okay, your home's safe to occupy, we're not going to provide you with any more rental assistance, yet your certified contractors are saying, still not safe yet, would FEMA provide assistance? That's something where you need to appeal and supply a whole bunch of documentation to substantiate your claims and leave it up to the FEMA gods to decide.
And I would encourage that to go through a licensed mold remediation organization versus a voluntary partner who can do mold suppression.
Yes.
Robin, can you state that one more time?
Sure. I would encourage you to do a licensed mold remediation organization company versus a voluntary partner that can do mold suppression.
And you need documentation, and again, contact information for these licensed individuals, because FEMA will call and verify. All right. We had some questions up here. I think her hand and then yours.
How soon will the help come out after a disaster?
From FEMA, from insurance, from everything? You remember that first slide I put up? Let me go back to it. It's gonna take a minute, right? So volunteers and community support are your number one. When a disaster is declared, it's initially FEMA public assistance is what is initially declared. FEMA then deploys their people out and they do damage assessment. So it could take a minute, right? It could take a minute because they're going from county to county, community to community to figure it out. And there are times when you have 3 counties that were approved individual assistance, and then a week later you have another 2 or 3, and then a week later it's another one. So it takes some time for them to do the damage assessment and make that determination. So there's no set time frame. It just depends upon a whole slew of factors, including how quickly they can get to these areas, how badly the roads, the infrastructure was damaged, the manpower, et cetera, et cetera. So again, FEMA will be in a disaster location. They provide individual assistance. IA is an 18-month window from the date of the declaration. So you do know the moment that FEMA IA declaration was made, you have 18 months for that assistance. Yes, sir.
Do you have any stats on from the time a disaster occurs to the time FEMA declares it to the time they actually show up? Because I've been around to a number of fires from Paradise and Magalia, the fires around here, the flood, and it's not a minute.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while to deploy. I do not have specific stats for that. I do know that when a disaster is declared, FEMA will ship a whole bunch of people out, and they'll start setting up disaster recovery centers. And so it takes a little while to set up the disaster recovery centers too. And then once the disaster recovery centers are completely set up, those FEMA agents are there the very next day, right? So unfortunately, I don't have, and every disaster is different.
That's not an answer. It's ridiculous.
I'm
Personal experience being in a number of different disasters, not just one where, one-off, okay, but a number of disasters.
I'm not with FEMA,
I know that.
so I can say I'm hearing you loud and clear, hearing you very, very loud and clear. Valerie.
And I was just gonna say, we have wildfires, so Dixie Fire burned for 3 months. So we need to get people out, or Calder Fire kind of burned for 3 months. We need to get people out there to do preliminary damage assessments. It's not safe. They're not gonna send people out there to walk among spot fires or whatever, until it's safe. Even sheriff, nobody's not letting anyone there until it's safe. And so we send that team out from FEMA, Cal OES, the county to go out to do those preliminary damage assessments. A flood, it rains, it's done, hurricane done, tornado done. Right. It takes longer with a wildfire, and that's part of the reason. And then FEMA goes through their metrics, and it's a little harder for wildfires.
And the governor of every state first must request FEMA's presence and financial support.
Yeah.
If the governor sits on that and takes 3 months before they do it, so be it.
Ours won't do that.
No.
Yeah.
But
And
there's a whole thing in the background that none of us really know about out in the public.
Exactly. And then we do come out almost immediately, the state does, with a local assistance center. So an individual assistance, we will contact every county, are you ready yet? Now the Dixie Fire took some time. It wasn't safe to get people there. It was evacuating every other day because that fire with the winds is moving. But we're out there immediately with an individual assistance center. We'll bring, my job as a voluntary agency liaison is to call with the Suchi Foundation and others to come in there with immediate assistance that they can bring, and our state agencies to help with document replacement and all that. I've had trouble working with the FEMA declaration with a flood because we did it one and the same, but usually the FEMA DRC will come in a lot later if we get a declaration, but we're almost immediate with that local assistance center.
It's been hard working out how it works because I'm not used to declarations here in California. We do wildfires. This flood is new.
And let's not forget, there might be a hiccup called we were not approved, and then we have to appeal. So in the county levels, we would have to do that. That could be another 30 days or so for everything to go in. So there is a process that, that goes through, and unfortunately on the county level, if this is happening, we are fighting tooth nail, no sleep to get this done for any forms, and that actually happened with the floods this time around. Paris Stew was great and not sleeping, but getting the appeals approved. But those are hiccups that we fight internally at times. My second question is actually going back to the conversation about SBA and approvals and all that. My question is that, what about those who are renters and going in, they don't have the ability, and it was back to something you were saying, Robin, about with FEMA, that they're low income and they don't have that ability to get the funding or be approved for that. And the assistance, I know we have our NGOs, but I think that's a concern we need to work systematically, because that is something that we, unfortunately, during the floods are noticing that is happening too. So it's something that we need to work out with SBA, is the equity and the quality of funding for all, because there are people who we think are living in high income, especially in our county, but they are third generation wealth from the house, or they're living in other parts of our county, and that is something that we need to assess on the SBA portion. Like, how can we make sure that our renters who are in this area can apply and get that funding correctly? And I don't have the answer, so I'm bringing it up as a conversation for our residents in our county.
Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, that's something, again, the SBA is not as extensive in my knowledge library, but that is something that is important, especially for survivors who even could afford a loan, but were not qualified for a loan, and then are left to having to get a higher interest loan. Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on that one.
Any of us do, this is something that we need to make it aware, and especially with this collaboration, we just really need to make that aware.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, again, rental assistance every 2 months. Make sure you fill out a continued temporary housing assistance form if you need additional assistance after that 2 months, et cetera, et cetera. Now let's talk about access and functional needs. This is something that is very important, I think less discussed. Now, when you apply for FEMA assistance, it's going to ask you if there's a disability in the home. And if you do the online version of the application, it's going to say something about mobility, and then you're going to skip it because you're going to think, oh, I don't have any mobility issues, but like I have respiratory issues, I have congenital heart failure, I have cognitive issues, I have vision issue impairment, hearing impairment, all these other things, but that doesn't apply to me because all I see is mobility. Okay. Make sure if there is a disability inside the household, whether it's you or someone else who lives inside that household, click on that disability box on that application. Another box will pop up, and it'll have a whole slew of options for you, right? Now, let's say it's too late. You've already applied, but you didn't indicate that there's someone with access and functional needs. Call FEMA's helpline. Ask for a Tier 2 specialist. Tier 2. So when you call FEMA's helpline, you get a Tier 1 specialist. They are more the newer people of the bunch, I like to think, who are not as expert in all things cases. So you want to ask for the Tier 2 who has more of the expert knowledge. And then say, hey, I actually have access and functional needs inside my household. Or you as the advocate, make sure you have your survivor that you're working with either on a 3-way call with you or in person with you on the phone, because FEMA is going to ask them a slew of questions, including social security numbers, et cetera, et cetera. And then you need to identify that there is access and functional needs. Identify what type of access and functional need there is inside that household. Now, there could be a possibility that FEMA could provide that household with a disability integration specialist. This is the individual that will help move the process along. Additionally, with access and functional needs, there could be times in which FEMA has it noted and will try to help make sure recovery is a little bit quicker for them too. Now, FEMA's trying to be more equitable, right? So I'm going to give Survivor A and Survivor B scenario here as to why there's access and functional needs assistance. Survivor A and Survivor B both had the same exact style home, the same amount of damage by the same exact disaster. There is nothing different in either of their situations except Survivor A has access and functional needs, Survivor B does not. So when FEMA supplies both Survivor A and Survivor B with the same exact award amount for home repair appeals and the same exact award amount for other needs assistance, Survivor B, who does not have access and functional needs, will be more likely to improve their home to that safe, sanitary, and functional needs than Survivor A with the access and functional needs without this additional access and functional needs assistance. Okay, so let's say Survivor A has mobility issues and needs a ramp to their home or needs grab bars inside their home. Some of the funds that Survivor A would have otherwise used in home repair would have gone towards the ramp, would have gone towards those handrails, right? But with access and functional needs assistance, FEMA can cover the cost of the ramp. FEMA can cover the costs of the handrails so that all the home repair assistance funds that Survivor A received can go to the structure of the home, just like Survivor B applied to their home, right? So this is why it's very important to identify whether there is an access and functional needs inside the household. Okay? Great.
Just out of curiosity, how do they, I mean, if those things weren't in the home before, is it simply because you're investing in the community and trying to rebuild that those things then are allowable outside costs?
If they were not inside the home before, it's likely that FEMA will not provide that assistance. FEMA's not coming to improve a property, that's bringing it back to the safe, sanitary, and functional.
So if grab bars and all of those things were not part of the home, they're not necessarily going to be offered?
Correct.
Unless it was disaster related that caused the need for the grab bars.
Yeah, so if a survivor became immobile due to the disaster, then FEMA could provide that assistance.
Oh, okay. Well, so it's not about being somewhat impaired prior to the disaster. It has to be a function of the disaster that you somehow have become impaired.
No. Okay, let me restate this.
Okay.
Okay, so your home was damaged because of the disaster. You already had these access and functional needs. You already had things set up in your house for your access and functional needs before the disaster. FEMA could assist you with that access and functional needs assistance. Now, if you had nothing set up in place before the disaster, yet you had access and functional needs before the disaster, FEMA will likely not assist you, right? Because that's improvements. But if you were injured as a result of the disaster, which caused access and functional needs, and you had nothing in place before because you were fully mobile, then FEMA could provide you with assistance.
And you can do an appeal if you were deemed medically to have mobility issues prior to the disaster, but you had no money to retrofit your home. You can appeal, show the letter from the medical staff submit the appeal with the letter, and your case will be reviewed for additional funding.
All right, thank you.
And that, oh, go ahead.
So I just want to verify that, but you can be reimbursed for the previous condition without the additional medical accommodation or needs, right?
Can you restate that?
Yeah. So let's say that just in the case scenario earlier, you didn't have the medical equipment accommodation prior, but then you can get reimbursed to what you already had before. Then you can you just take the funding and then add to your own funding to equip you to the medical accommodation.
So let me make sure I understood this correctly. No problem. So what you're asking is, if you had an access and functional needs condition before the disaster, and you had everything set up for that. Oh, you did not have anything. Then if you had an access and functional needs condition before the disaster and you did not have everything set up, FEMA is not likely to provide any access and functional needs assistance, because they're going to try to bring what you previously had in your home back to that safe, sanitary, and functional condition, right? The only way that they would help you to bring your home, to this access and functional needs ability is if you were injured during the disaster.
No, I understand that, but you can get reimbursement to what the previous condition was, and then just add to your own funding for the medical access.
Oh, yeah. So whatever you pay out of pocket is your thing. So let's say your home was not set up for access and functional needs. FEMA's still going to provide you with home repair assistance, still going to provide you with personal property assistance, as if you do not have access and functional needs. You apply all of those funds that FEMA provides you according to their allocation, right? It's very important. You apply the home repair funds towards the structure of your home. You apply your personal property funds towards essential personal property. And then out of your own pocket, if you have access and functional needs, you would pay for those access and functional needs things.
And or you can appeal. Right?
And
that's what we said earlier.
you can appeal as long as you have a note from the doctor that declared you have mobility issues. And during that appeal, you submit that letter, and then your out-of-money pocket can be looked at. It's not a guarantee, but your case will be looked at for review so that you could potentially receive additional money, which is the money that you spent out of pocket.
And this is really important with everything else that you're appealing. If you are appealing anything access and functional needs based, and let's say you had insurance for some things, for your mobility or your vision or your hearing or whatever, you need to seek first a claim with your insurance company. If your insurance company, your health insurance company, does not provide sufficient funds or denies you, that is when you supply that documentation to FEMA in an appeal, and then FEMA can evaluate whether or not they will provide assistance. And when you get doctor's notes, this is also very important. It's many times a doctor is going to go ahead and be lazy and just give you your whole case file, right? It is not HIPAA compliant when that happens. And you send that over to FEMA, FEMA's going to close their eyes and say, we're not looking at this. So you need to make sure that the doctor writes an actual letter and says, survivor A has congenital heart failure and needs this, or survivor A has mobility, has to handwrite it. Doctors hate doing that. They have horrible handwriting, right? They don't want to cramp their wrists. But that has to be done because it cannot be the case file. It cannot be your HIPAA regulated information. Great conversation, guys. I'm loving it. Okay. It's already stated, but if you were a homeowner, the maximum award amount you could ever possibly receive from FEMA is $82,000, but it does not include access and functional needs or home repair. Have I ever seen this happen? No, not once. I have seen homeowners receive the maximum eligible amount of funds for housing assistance. I've never seen anyone max out on their other needs assistance. Not saying it's not a possibility, I'm just saying I have not seen it. Yeah. But appealing is vital. Appeal, 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 right? Okay, let's talk about eligibility for a minute. Who qualifies? Oh, yeah, Valerie.
I've got a loud voice, so I just wanted to add one more thing. In the state of California, it's automatic. We don't have an individual assistance program like a FEMA program, but we do have the state supplemental grant program. So it's automatic. If they think you've maxed out, automatically it'll go through our state supplemental grant program. That's $10K additional that you could receive.
Oh, cool.
That's fantastic. All right, so who qualifies? You have homeowners who own and occupy the home at the time of the disaster. They can qualify for home repair assistance, home housing assistance, and other needs assistance, as long as they were denied personal property, transportation, moving, and group flood insurance is all contingent upon the SBA, remember? Or renters who occupy the residence at the time of the disaster, right? Again, secondary homes do not qualify. If you are a landlord with rental units, the SBA may provide you with a loan. You can apply, see what they say. Citizenship requirements. We're in California, right? So this is a big one. Okay. FEMA has certain qualifications for citizenship. So if you were born in the United States and have a Social Security number, you will be eligible for potential funding. But what if you are a migrant worker? What happens then? Well, you could, and is it, yeah, it's right here. If you have a minor child, a child under the age of 18, living in the house with you at the time of the disaster, you could potentially be eligible for FEMA assistance. Now, you're thinking, I have a 2-year-old child. How am I going to qualify for this FEMA assistance? You need to put that 2-year-old child's name as the primary registrant and put their Social Security right next to it. Then you as the adult, put your name as the co-registrant. Now, either the primary registrant or the co-registrant has the ability to speak to FEMA about that case file, right? So FEMA's going to call, and they're going to have the primary registrant. You're going to have the 2-year-old child's name written on the thing, but you, as the co-registrant, will be able to correspond with FEMA, okay? If you are a migrant worker and there is no minor child inside that household, all the things we talked about will likely not be provided. However, there could be other types of non-cash assistance that FEMA could assist with, and that's when you might want to rely on state, county, and other type of community organizations for assistance. Okay. One additional thing to note. There's fear and concern about ICE. I have spoken to an immigration attorney asking about this very thing. Now, if I could say one thing about FEMA, it would be they are such sticklers when it comes to privacy. Huge sticklers. So the likelihood of any ICE representative getting inside a case and viewing that case file is slim to none. But can never say never, right? If an ICE representative views a case file and tracks down this migrant worker, undocumented worker, as long as this undocumented individual survivor has written everything truthfully and accurately, immigration attorneys have the power to support this survivor. Okay? So we really want to eliminate that fear for these undocumented individuals, because sometimes they're in housing that, you know, is some of the worst type of housing that sustains massive damage, and it is not safe to live in moldy or smoke-filled homes like that, right? So really trying to establish that trust with these individuals and encouraging them to apply for FEMA assistance if they are eligible is the best thing that you guys could do for them. Okay.
They're migrants and they still don't have a social security number.
If they are migrants and they do not have a social security number and no one inside the household has a social security number, again, the cash funds that FEMA provides, the individual household assistance, well, they'll not be eligible for, but FEMA might have other types of assistance that they can provide, and you can always check with the state, the county, the city for any local funds, and then community organizations, nonprofit organizations assistance. Yeah. These are individuals who do not qualify for FEMA or SBA. Tourist visa holders, student loan, or foreign students, temporary work visa holders, and habitual residents of Micronesia or Marshall Islands. Questions on eligibility? All right, let's go to the application process. Okay, what you need to register is a social security number. Again, if it's a minor child, and that minor child's the only one with a social security number, that's okay. Put them as the primary registrant. The adult is the co-registrant, right? 2 forms of identification is the best because FEMA wants to verify your identity. You could be denied because you didn't provide sufficient forms of identification. And you could be eligible for a whole slew of money. And the only thing stopping you from getting that money is that identification. So you want to make sure you prove who you are. You want to list out the number of occupants and include their ages. Now, again, FEMA looks for safe, sanitary, and functional. So let's say I have a family of 5. I apply to FEMA. I have a 3-bedroom house, family of 5. I applied to FEMA assistance. I only put my name down. FEMA's going to look at that as a 3-bedroom house for 1 person, so 2 of the bedrooms don't need to be fixed because no one's living in those 2 bedrooms, right? I have 2 bathrooms. I only need 1 bathroom because I'm just 1 person. All the items inside the house that are in the other bedrooms and things aren't needed because I'm just 1 person. So you want to make sure you identify all the members of the household so that when FEMA sees, oh, there's actually 5 people, then that makes sense, 2 bedrooms, et cetera, right? So list them out. Additionally, there could be situations in which the state or FEMA brings in something called direct housing, the FEMA trailers, right? So let's say I have 3 teenage boys, right? Super tall. And then my partner, my spouse, and I. And FEMA will look at that and say, you might need to have a trailer that accommodates essentially 5 adults, right? As opposed to 2 adults and 3 young kids, right? So you want to make sure you have this information in there. Okay, contact information. Very important. You want the damaged dwelling address. So the address that was damaged. If you are not living in that house, you want your current address. If your house has a P.O. box or you have a different mailing, you want to have that mailing address listed as well. FEMA is going to send you correspondence. You want to make sure you receive that correspondence.
So you want a physical address, not a P.O. box?
So you want the physical address of your damaged dwelling. Has to be that physical address of the damaged dwelling. But if mail cannot get there, I'm living in that situation right now. USPS does not come to my house, right? FedEx, UPS does, but not USPS. So you need to I need to also include my mailing address. Now let's say my home was damaged. The only closest place I can live is an hour away. I'm not checking my mail very often. So you want to include your current mailing address, right? Somewhere where you can access that mail. And if I have to move again in like 2 or 3 months to another location because it was only temporary, I'm getting on the phone with FEMA and I'm telling them my updated mailing address because they are going to continue sending me correspondence. Some of it can be the continued temporary housing assistance form. Or if I don't have direct deposit set up, it could be something as important as FEMA checks, right? You don't want to miss out on that. So make sure you update FEMA with your most up-to-date mailing address. Also include email, phone numbers. If, like especially post-disaster, it's a lot of times when cell service is really bad, you give FEMA a number that is like a solid landline or whatever. Once you have other phone numbers, be sure to update them with updated numbers.
So if a disaster recovery center is still open, can those updates be made there? Or
Yeah, she asked if a disaster recovery center is still open, can those updates be made there? Yes, absolutely. You can update at DRCs, disaster recovery centers. You can update over the phone. And if you have a disaster assistance, is this possible on the disasterassistance.gov? So if you have a profile on your disasterassistance.gov, which is FEMA's application and correspondence location, you can update your profile for your most recent addresses. And if you are technologically savvy, it is pretty great to have that online profile, right? And it's recommended because then you can see all the correspondence immediately. There's less likelihood of things getting lost in the mail. And it is easier to submit appeals. If you don't submit appeals through your disasterassistance.gov, it's got to be through fax. And we have had problems with the fax machines. Household income. Again, do not put 0 down as your household income. Don't do it. Put your accurate household income. Banking information, if you have a bank. I've worked with survivors who don't even have banks. So this is something, if it's a possibility, again, highly recommend it because the funds go directly into the bank account. Do tell the survivors that you're working with, however, if FEMA approves you for any type of assistance, you're likely going to receive funds inside your bank account before you receive the determination letter. So we've had survivors who are like, I just got $10,000 in my bank account. I don't know why. And you want to stop them from just doing a spending spree, right? You want to make sure they get the determination letter to understand where they're supposed to apply it to. This is so important, you guys, because FEMA can and has and does audit. And if you have not properly used your funds, they could recoup the funds. And you definitely don't want that. So on top of that, you want to keep all your receipts forever and ever, and ever, and ever. Take pictures of them, put them on the cloud. I mean, I'm talking forever. I've heard of, and it wasn't necessarily FEMA that was doing the recoup, but I've heard of people being audited from Hurricane Katrina 17 years ago, last year. Keep your receipts forever.
For experience, people were being audited from the 1994 Northridge earthquake up to 2020. And that's when everything closed in LA City for that earthquake, but people, survivors who did receive funds, some of them did get audited years and years after the earthquake, so it's quite
Same
interesting.
idea. Wow.
Yeah, so,
17 years later, that's just amazing.
yeah. So, insurance information. Make sure you supply FEMA with your insurance information. You don't know yet whether or not you're going to receive a settlement, but you might have your declaration page available. Give that to FEMA. FEMA can look at that declaration page and understand what insurance won't even cover because it's not part of your coverage, right? And then FEMA can say, well, you might not, we know for 100% that you're not eligible for insurance settlement for this thing, so we'll supply you with this funds for this item, right? It's very likely if you have insurance, no matter what, you will need to appeal a FEMA determination because once you have insurance, FEMA is going to say you are ineligible due to insurance coverage. And I guarantee you, you're going to hear a lot of people say, but I was denied, or my insurance didn't give me the proper thing. Why does it say I'm ineligible? In FEMA's eyes, you are not denied assistance. It just means we need more information. I'm going to be completely honest here. I'd love for the language to change in that determination letter to be easier to understand. FEMA's covering all their bases. They have attorneys who write those letters, and it makes it a very unfortunate thing. So you as survivor advocates really need to help survivors understand. If I was president of the United States, which I will never ever want to be, the one thing I would change is that FEMA determination letter language to make it more understandable for survivors. But until then, which is never going to happen, you got to do it.
What happens if the person doesn't have the receipts?
What if they do not? What if the person does not have the receipts for any of the damages that have occurred, or
Liable to, they have to pay that? I mean,
if they do not have receipts of how they utilized FEMA's funds, yeah, may God be with them. I don't know. That's a really, yeah. So really try to make sure that they use the funds properly. Yeah.
And it might not bite them much later. It might happen quickly, like the CZU fire. We had people who got their FEMA money, misstated something, but got a payout and then had to pay it back. And ended up having to go to unmet needs and get help because they were just between a rock and a hard place, and we were trying to help them on a case, and so that became part of their case, which is not something anybody ever wants to be doing, right? So just, they have to spend it on what it's intended, and they need to be very careful in their representation of, because that callback was about a year in that we saw those notices.
And this goes with FEMA, with SBA, with insurance. Utilize the funds according to their allocation. I've had survivors that I've worked with who received personal property awards and bought ATVs for their kids. You know, and then I'm like, I can't protect you.
Don't drive up in your new car to say you can't afford it.
Yeah. So, yeah, really make sure and tell the survivors if they get direct deposit, wait to use the funds until they get the determination letter. But one thing also to note, unlike insurance, when you receive FEMA funds, even if you have not received your maximum eligible amount of funds, go ahead and start using those funds to repair your home. Again, keep the receipts, and you can appeal in conjunction with that, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit more too. But you don't need to wait until you receive the maximum eligible amount of funding from FEMA in order to start using those funds. Yeah.
And take pictures of the repair work that you're starting to show that the damage was there. You now have proof.
But you take pictures, but I would not send them to FEMA.
Nope.
Do not send them to FEMA. Keep them on your phone for when FEMA inspectors come by,
Exactly.
right? Or if by chance you're audited, you have that. Yes. Have a list of damages of your what has been damaged to your home and property. I can't remember if Angela stated this in her Recovery 101, but you think you have enough photos of the damages? You don't. It's 400 photos or 40 minutes worth of video is what you should have to properly capture the extent of damage. Valerie, you had something else?
Yeah, on our website, we do have a link from a claims adjuster of how to accurately take those photos, because none of us are very good at that, and we don't know what they're looking for. So I'll find that, share that with you.
Great. So definitely go onto United Policyholders website. It's UP, the letter U, the letter P, help.org, and it will list out how you can properly take photos and videos of the damages to your home. You have a question over here.
No, I was just gonna say the best thing to do then is take an inventory prior to.
Yes, and before disaster ever occurs, please take photos. Put them on the cloud, because you might be scrambling, especially for insurance claims, for anything. You might be scrambling, asking friends, hey, do you have any photos of my house? Or checking your Facebook, do I have any photos of my house? So take photos, put them on the cloud. Yes, before and after the disaster. Again, any list of needs that you currently have, you want to supply FEMA with ownership and occupancy documents. Again, that list out of documents is in your pamphlet. To prove occupancy, it could be things such as a utility bill that is in your name that goes to your damaged dwelling address, right? That is sufficient to prove that you occupied the home. It has to be within 3 months of the date of the disaster. Has to be within 3 months of the date of the disaster. Okay? All right. Now, I've stated this before. I'm going to state this one more time. After you apply, FEMA is going to call. Say, hey, are you living in your home? And you say, yeah. Don't just end with yeah. If it is not safe to live in, or you're not sure it's safe to live in, say, yeah, but I have nowhere else to live right now because I can't afford it. My home is not safe. I have mold up to here. I have, my roof's caved in, whatever it may be. Half the wall's missing because of this fire. Whatever it may be. Say, yeah, it's not safe for me to live here. Okay?
Most people wouldn't think to say that.
No, they would not think to say that.
Does FEMA try to elicit that from you?
No, FEMA will not elicit this from you. So it is up to us as survivor advocates to ensure that survivors know how to respond properly to FEMA. Again, FEMA's trying to ensure that this goes to those who are most in need. However, those most in need are the least savvy in all of this and need that additional understanding, which is why I'm here and which is why you are here. Robin.
Can I just say that as part of the intake process with FEMA when you're registering, thank you, you'll be asked a series of questions. During that process, the way that you answer matters. But there are several of these questions that you're asked that can later be changed. Some of them, however, cannot, and that will also affect your determination. It's always best when you're in the middle of a disaster to do this with a friend that hasn't necessarily been impacted by the disaster, or ask the intake staff for clarifying information. We don't always like to give it, but you should always be asking. The clarifying questions are going to be about and I think that you spoke earlier about it on, are you willing to relocate is one of them. It doesn't necessarily mean, are you permanently willing to move? It's temporarily, are you willing to relocate while your home is repaired? The answer to that needs to be yes, if you really cannot stay in that dwelling. But the damaged home, if your home has been without electricity for 5 days, I think it is, or more, based on those answers, oh my gosh, based on those answers, the amount of assistance or the eligibility for your assistance can change, sometimes drastically. So try to do it with a friend.
Yeah, who isn't as high up in that stress level and can see a little clearer and think a little clearer. Okay, so FEMA is going to try to contact you 3 times. 1, 2, 3. If they cannot reach you within 3 times, they're going to close your case. No?
Nope.
They're going to put it on hold.
It's on
Yeah.
hold.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility then to call FEMA back.
Yeah, so that's what I mean by close the case, right? They're not going to try reaching out anymore. So
All this moving around and everything, you really need to keep them abreast of what's going on.
yeah. Additionally, this is important. You have a major disaster, cell service is down, internet's spotty, and FEMA's trying to call you, and they're saying, oh, tried 3 times. They're required to try 3 times, 3 ways, in 3 different days.
And times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you have no cell service. You're not getting the calls. What my recommendation is, whenever you are in range of cell service, call FEMA. And unfortunately, generally those times it's 2-hour waits, 3-hour waits, let FEMA know. Or if you can go to a DRC, do that and say, hey, I have no cell service. I'm waiting. The only big issue here is for survivors who are really low income and it's pay per minute cell phone, right? If there is any advocate that can assist in calling, that would be best, right? Really want to make sure FEMA is understanding that you are actively engaged in your recovery, right? This could also happen with FEMA inspectors. So again, you want to make sure you are contacting FEMA saying, hey, Now, during disasters, fraud is rampant. And there are going to be people who are pretending to be FEMA also calling you. If you do not trust that it is a FEMA representative calling you on the phone, say, hey, I don't think you're actually FEMA. You can hang up the phone. Then call FEMA's helpline. Because what's going to happen, if it actually was FEMA that was calling you, that FEMA agent is going to put a note inside your case file saying, survivor did not think I was FEMA. Then you call FEMA's helpline, say, hey, someone just called me, I don't actually think they're FEMA. Then that FEMA agent on the helpline that you reached out to will identify whether or not it was fraud. And then they can call you back and continue on with that conversation. Or that FEMA helpline worker can ask whatever question it was that the agent who had called you initially was asking, okay? But it's better to, be overly cautious than provide sensitive information. Again, if a FEMA agent calls you and then asks you what your phone number is, that is not a FEMA agent, right? Ask you for your full social security number, don't give it. Okay?
There are clarifying questions when FEMA contacts you as an applicant that you must answer before we will even speak with you. If you want to ask any questions about your case, you must first answer, I think it's 5 clarifying questions, and Social Security, the last 4 digits only, is one of those questions.
But not the entire social security number.
No. Phone number, co-registrant's name, damaged dwelling address, last 4 of your social, I think I'm forgetting one. But yeah, every time you call, if you're asking about your case, you must answer those questions.
And that's when you call, right? So, yeah. Okay, and then lastly, if you're referred to the SBA, can't state it enough, apply immediately. Okay,